Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, it is another movie review. This time of the 1997 disaster movie starring Tommy Lee Jones, Volcano. I love that tagline. The coast is toast. This is another Patreon request from my good buddy John Zero Cool. And this is a film I've actually been meaning to revisit for a while. I always used to enjoy watching this one in the mid-2000s when I used to have it on a recorded VHS. Of course, now I got the actual VHS copy, the premiere series, which I'll say the copy still looks pretty good. I mean, watching it on my HD TV, it doesn't really get the full experience of VHS in there because it's a little bit higher quality than what this was made for, but it still looks pretty good on that TV. Now, before I get too far into it, just a reminder that if you do want to request videos like this, you can always join the Patreon. Depending on the tier, you'll gain access to videos early, and you'll be able to make a certain amount of requests, or you might even be able to request a commentary. And if you just want to do a one-off request or a one-off support for the channel, the PayPal link is also down below. Volcano. It was directed by Mick Jackson, who also directed LA Story and The Bodyguard. He directed a few other things after this, but this seems to be his last big film, at least that, a name that jumps out to me. And looking at the budget versus gross, I could see why, because this film sadly underperformed. But I'll get to that later when I'm talking about some of the critical reception. The screenplay was by Jerome Armstrong and Billy Ray. Armstrong, this was the only thing he wrote according to IMDb. And Billy Ray, other things that jumped out that he worked on were Heart's War, Captain Phillips, and Terminator Dark Fate. That's me listening for the people crying a certain word that begins with a W and ends with and rhymes with poke. Score by Alan Silvestri, and this is another classic Silvestri one. Really does fit the tone of the film. Has that disaster quality, but also some of that uplifting humans working together to try to save the day quality. The cinematography was by Theo Van de Sande, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Other films he worked on around this same time period were The First Power. It's a film that's on the watch list. A childhood favorite of mine, Bushwhacked, which I believe I still have a review of up on the channel. It's Winnie the Pooh! Of course, Blade and Little Nicky. I'm actually one of the few people that actually likes that film, and the look of the film is part of the reason. Now, Tommy Lee Jones stars as the lead, Michael Rourke, which he was not the first person considered for the role, but he really does fit this everyman type character. Yeah, there's a little bit of blue collarness to him, but he's definitely more a white collar character, but he's like a off-white, light blue collar type character. The other actors considered were Ed Harris, Bill Pullman, and Bruce Willis, according to IMDb. All three of those I could really see playing Rourke, even though Tommy Lee Jones, you look at him and you're like, how could they get anybody else? But those three, I could see each of them playing Rourke, and it would have been similar, yet it would have each had its own distinct flair. Of course, with Bill Pullman, there would have been all the jokes like first volcanoes, now aliens. And Heche plays Amy Barnes, who is I believe she's a geologist, but they never specify if she's just a normal geologist or a volcanologist, which is a more specialized one. But she knows enough about geology in order to help. We got Don Cheadle in there as Emmett Reese, who works with Rourke. Gabby Hoffman plays Rourke's daughter Kelly. We got Keith David in there as LAPD Lieutenant Ed Fox. He does a pretty good job for when he's in there. Jacqueline Kim plays the doctor character Jay Calder, which she has a nice little mini arc throughout the story, which I'll get to in a bit. And there's a couple other actors, but those are the main ones that stood out. But this is one that plays a very minor character that I noticed. I'm like, is that who I think it is? Yep, it's Valente Rodriguez, who plays the train driver. If that name doesn't sound familiar, he's the guy who went on to play Ernie in the George Lopez show. George's best friend on the show. Only here he's sporting a mustache. That's why I was like, is that him? Look him. Oh yeah, it is him. Doesn't really have a lot to work with because he's just a train driver, but still nice to see him in there. Now, from the title like that, you can kind of tell what type of film we're going to get to. I mean, even if you look at the poster, you could see. The basic premise of the film is that a volcano bursts forth in the heart of LA near the La Brea tar pits. It goes down Wilshire, and the entire city, all the first responders, fire, police, emergency vehicles, and other city services have to try to figure out a way to stop the volcano and causes the least amount of damage and save as most lives as they can. And they do everything. They bring some buildings down. They use K-rails. They get a lot of water. They have to try to redirect the flow of lava. They stop the initial eruption, but then it was like, oh yeah, there's subways, so we got to see where it's going along there. There's one scene where they have to go underground to save people who were on one of the trains when the initial eruption hit. That's where Valente's character is. And that scene is like, ooh, yeah. That's one of the moments where it's like, would in real life somebody do that? But I figure someone in real life probably would do that. But it's one of those ones that definitely would be an individual basis. Someone might go, forget the persons! Get everyone else out of there and save your own skin. Of course, by the end of the film, they've all saved everybody, and town is regularly back to normal. But you would figure if something like this happened in real life, which, just as a quick aside, with the type of fault the San Andreas fault is, this would not happen, because for a volcano, you have to have a fault line that's moving apart like that, whereas the San Andreas fault's more like a... Which is why, as Robin Williams put it, out here in California, we live on God's Etch-a-Sketch. And of course, we get blasé. 2.5, not bad. 5.4, maybe we should have drinks outside. And of course, you see some of that blasé when it comes to the earthquakes, even though they're more major than we've had in a while. But, I mean, even though we live on the Elsinore Fault, which is a subsect of the San Andreas Fault, out where I live, we barely have like the major one. It's more like an earthquake or a truck. Oh, it's an earthquake. Very rarely do we feel a big one. Of course, last time that we had a big one that everyone felt, that was a couple years ago, Anime Expo weekend, when we were in the hotel. Getting back onto the sidebar, just, you know, the fact it's a different type of fault aside, if something like this would happen, I could see all the emergency services reacting in the way they do here. And it definitely would shake up LA. Now, would people still be living in downtown LA with the volcano right there? That's one of those things where you got to say, probably not, no sane person would, but think about it. Think about how many active volcanoes exist on the planet and people still live in their vicinity. Tokyo. I mean, it's not like right next to Mount Fuji, but it's, you know, given the size of the islands of Japan, it's relatively next door to Mount Fuji, and there's other active volcanoes there. Mount Shasta's still active, and there's reasonable stuff around there. Mount Rainier up in Oregon, and even Mount St. Helens before it went, Washington. But Mount St. Helens before it erupted. And then all the other volcanoes in other parts of the world. And then, of course, Yellowstone being a super volcano caldera. Look how many people still visit there, and it could go at any moment if you look at it on the geographic time frame, which is thousands of hundreds of thousands of years. So people will. And an active volcano like this that we see at the end, Mount Wilshire, yeah. And of course, all that smoke, people would say, well, all the smog in LA is not like it's going to make a major difference. Now, of course, that ending, it does end on a 100% note, but that could also have been a setup for a sequel that never happened. Although, I'd say this definitely does work better as a standalone film, because there would have been a lot of jokes if they decided to make a sequel if this had done better than it did, like Volcano 2. This time it's personal. You know, other stuff like that, taking the little subtitles from sequels. Just when you thought it was safe to visit LA. Of course, someone would say, it's never safe to visit LA. Well, joke's on them, Anime Expo's coming up. Because if he's like, LA, I don't want to go, but Anime Expo, you son of a bitch, I'm in. Now, Tommy Lee Jones, he really does play Rourke very well. You really do like seeing his character every time he's on screen and the way he comes up with the solutions. Some might say it's a little Gary Sue-esque, but considering how old Tommy Lee was when he played this character and through dialogue how often they hint he's been at work and the fact he's a workaholic. I mean, that's part of his character arc, is letting to let go and enjoy life when he's on vacation. And he does end the film by saying, tell him I'm on vacation. You really do believe he could come up with a lot of this stuff on the fly, like when his plans don't work and he looks at what he has, he's like, okay, this is what we got. I mean, it does kind of stretch your, you know, the whole suspension of disbelief a little bit, but the way Tommy Lee plays it, you're like, okay, I could buy it. Then when combined with Anne, Keith, and the rest of the characters, it really does come off as believable. And Heche, this is one of the big films she made around this time, the other one being 6 Days, 7 Nights. I know she did other stuff, but those seem to be the big ones, and I don't really know why. Maybe she just preferred taking smaller films after that. I mean, once you work with Tommy Lee Jones and then Harrison Ford back to back, you can kind of say your career has peaked unless you win an Oscar. And Don Cheadle is Reese. I mean, he went on to other big things. I mean, he is making a lot of that Marvel money right now, but he does a good job here. It's kind of interesting that we got a film. It's kind of in the, not directly in the middle, but kind of, where we now have Harvey Dent and War Machine working together to try to stop a volcano. That kind of sounds more like a crossover comic thing where Two-Face is actually just trying to make a volcano erupt. War Machine's trying to stop it, but it is what it is. And then, of course, you can throw Keith David in there as a police lieutenant. He's also great in there. Gabby, she does all right as Kelly. I mean, she only has a few scenes and all that. At the beginning, Tommy Lee still treating her like a little kid, but she doesn't help herself by saying the sarcastic comment, I bend over and kiss my ass goodbye. Which is like, really, Tommy, you got to go that far? She's 13. She's old enough to be by herself. At the top, I did bring in the Dr. Calder little story arc. Now, her husband, I didn't write the actor's name down, but her husband, very rich guy, is living in the penthouse that they eventually destroy at the end. Bringing up that they're set. They made good business deals, and now he wants his wife to stop being a doctor and to retire. And she's hesitant, and then as the film goes on, of course, with everything going on, she has to go down there and actually start helping all the patients. I mean, the big thing, every doctor and other medical professional is going to be all hands on deck. And near the end, before they start moving, he starts getting on her, like, you don't have to be down here, let others take over. Hey, are you paying attention to me? At that point, it's like, hey, dude, I get that you're concerned about your wife because of how long she's been working there and all that, but here's the thing. Stop trying to micromanage and control her. She's a big girl. She is a medical doctor. She is doing her job. Leave her the fuck alone. I'm actually surprised that she didn't have security take her husband away at that point. As in real life, we know something like that probably would have happened. And the fact he walks away is like, yeah, that marriage is ending after that because she just saw his true colors. I mean, we saw a little bit of it at the beginning because when he's trying to get her to quit. I mean, it just shows how many years it's been since I've seen this movie. I hated him before, but watching this, the first thing I was thinking when I saw that scene, I'm like, red flag, red flag. And then that scene at the end where she basically starts ignoring him and he's trying to talk with her, I'm like, crimson. But of course, she learns to be a little bit more independent. I mean, she already was, but she's going away from her husband because she finally sees him for what type of person he is. Now, given that this film was made a little bit after a couple major incidents that happened in L.A., the Rodney King beating and, of course, the O.J. Simpson trial, it does touch a little bit on how divisive L.A. can be. I mean, in the opening part of the film where they're setting up the fact we're in L.A. and what's going on with the people, we do see a little bit of that. And we even see some of that when one of the characters who is black is trying to get the fire department to go and help his neighborhood a stone's throw away. And then one of the cops, who is a major ass, comes up and cuffs him. It's like, really, dude? There's a volcano going off, and you're going to go and arrest somebody for hassling a firefighter. There's a time and place for everything, buddy. You don't arrest somebody like that in the middle of that. And I do like that some of the other cops are telling him, really, dude? And, of course, at one point, he's like, oh, yeah. He actually brings up Rodney King. Now, due to everything, they do bury the hatchet a little bit, which ties into one of the central themes of the movie, and that is that when the chips are down and there's a major incident, whether it be a natural disaster, some man-made disaster like a terrorist attack, humans will set aside all their little petty differences, even if it's just in the short term, to come together and help one another, showing that we are, a social tribal species. Now, this is both a good thing and a bad thing because it's good that we do set aside everything to come together and help one another, but it is kind of sad that it's like, really, it takes something that big for us to set aside all these petty squabbles and grievances to come together and actually help one another instead of doing it, just for the sake of everybody, to use a Star Trekism, for the needs of the many. But I guess you could say in a situation like that, that's where that comes into mind with everybody, even if it's on a subconscious basis. And they do help. I mean, like, in that part of the film, once they uncuff him, the black character does help them move the K-rails, and then in return, once they stop it, the one officer redirects some of the fire trucks to go help the houses. Which you really do feel for, because we hear one of the old guys go, "I was born in that house." So you really do feel the history that's being destroyed by Mother Nature. But Mother Nature doesn't care. To steal a line I usually bring up when I'm talking about LARP stuff, plot can be a bitch. Mother Nature can also be one too, as we see in this film. Now, the other part of the film that ties into this is at the end, after they've stopped the major eruption and redirected the flow. It's when Keith David's character is trying to find the parent of the little kid that Kelly was watching. Everyone's covered in dust and ash. And this part is a little on the nose. I mean, there's films that kind of tackle the same thing that are more on the nose, but it's one of those moments that, yeah, I actually don't mind it. I mean, it ties into the cheesy factor of the film, but it's one of those things that, come on, it's a movie about a volcano in LA. You know what type of film you're signing up for when you go and see it. Hold on to that thought for a second. Now, what he says is, look at them, they all look the same with all of it. From the mouth of babes. Just the way that part of the film is shot and edited, you really do like, yeah, we're not so different after all. We're all human. We all bleed the same. We all breathe the same. We all live and die the same. Rich, poor, black, white, male, female, any other gender identity. So regardless of it, we're all humans, and we come together for disasters like this. I mean, the child could see that we're all the same. It's one of those things that, like, why do we let these petty grievances keep us apart? We all know the reasons that humans can be petty creatures, but it is good that in a situation like this, we can put those aside and come together, even if that is also a negative. Like, why does it take something like that to do that? Now, it was filmed on location in LA, which makes sense since a lot of film productions are started in LA. Of course, that probably also amounts for why the budget was as high as it was. Filmed in MacArthur Park, which I haven't been in because of stories about it, but I've been nearby it. I mean, after one LA Comic-Con, me, Alan, and Jeff actually ate at a Carl's Jr. across the street from MacArthur Park. Filmed by Cedar Sinai, and of course at the La Brea Tar Pits. And they did create Wilshire Boulevard inside. It was 80% full size, and it was an elaborate miniaturized portion because they had to make it look like it was being destroyed and burned by the lava flow. So obviously they're not going to be able to film that on location. But it's so realistic that even though you know it's probably a movie set, it just looks so real. I don't know what the scale is or if they get the roads correct on it, because I don't think I've been at that part of LA that, or at least at the point where I can remember everything, but it looks well. And all the rest of the visual effects are still convincing. I mean, lava is very viscous and liquid-like, so the CG and practical effects on it still look good today. Now, I know they kind of mix and match the different elements of the different volcanoes, but it's one of those things that's, it's fiction, you let it slide. Now, I know the other volcano film from the same time, Dante's Peak, is a little bit more realistic with how it comes to the volcano effects, but that's one of those things that, like, okay, if it works for that film, it works there. If this works for this film, it works for this film. I mean, we're already going into fantastical by having a volcano appear in LA, so letting all the other behavior go, okay, it works within the context of the film. You'll suspend your disbelief just enough. I can understand if volcanologists are like, yeah. But even with that, it's like, it's a film. It's not a documentary. 300 techs that worked on the visual effects, I gotta applaud them for that because their work still looks excellent. Now, I mentioned a little bit ago about underperforming and some of the critical response. The reviews for it were mixed, and of course, the Razzies did nominate it for Worst Reckless Disregard for Human Life and Public Property, which this is one of those tongue-in-cheek categories they have, which considering it's a disaster movie, I see why they threw that in. But it lost to Con Air, which both is like a what the. There's reasons like that where a lot of times I don't take the Razzies seriously. I mean, look at how many times they've nominated Stallone for Worst Director or Worst Actor. That alone could tell you, like, yeah, they really shouldn't be trusted when it comes to this. It's all tongue-in-cheek. Now, the underperformance, it cost about $90 million, which some of that I attribute to the fact they filmed on location in LA, some of it to the visual effects, and then, of course, some of it to the stars. I mean, this is Tommy Lee Jones' post-Oscar win. A few years after, but he was still post-Oscar win. He probably commanded a hefty paycheck for this film. And then everybody else, all the extras, yeah, then you throw on the 12-hour days, all the union fees and all that, and then also in LA. No wonder it cost $90 million, which, without looking, I hear that's like double what Dante's Peak cost. And it only made $122.8 million. So, as I've brought up multiple times before about Hollywood accounting, if you look at just the straight numbers, that's a little bit of a profit. But if you go by Hollywood accounting, where you have to make double your budget to break even, then it was a flop. But of course, that doesn't state if that's just a theatrical gross or the home video one, because I have a feeling that if they factor the home video in there, it finally started to turn a profit eventually. And of course, we see that not all the critical reaction was bad. I mean, there's 2 ones on here. You'll have a hell of a time from the time. And then Pat Collins of W War TV said this is the Volcano movie to see. I guess that would depend on if you want more direct entertainment, popcorn entertainment, or if you want a more realistic one. I haven't seen Dante's Peak at all, so I have no comment on whether that's a good one. But just looking at how the films arrange, I kind of find it funny that I had Volcano 2 films away from Con Air. I just noticed that. Ironic. Now, there was one looks like mostly negative review or mixed review that I posted a little snippet of here. And if you guys know which critics I'm not really the biggest fan of, you could probably guess who it probably is going to be. This is from Ebert, writing in the Chicago Sun-Times. The ads say the coast is toast, but maybe they should say the volcano is Drano. This is a surprisingly cheesy disaster epic. It said the Volcano cost a lot more than Dante's Peak, a competing volcano movie released 2 months ago, but it doesn't look it. Dante's Peak had better special effects, a more entertaining story, and a real mountain. Better special effects, can't really comment on since I haven't seen Dante's Peak. More entertaining story, that part is very subjective. And a real mountain, that part is like just Ebert throwing in some of his snark, because we all know he can throw his snark in. Sometimes it's justified, North, but other times it's like, really? Like the gripe he seems to have towards slasher movies, like Walking Out a Maniac and stuff like that, where I'm like, that's why I don't really take him seriously. He shows his little bias towards certain films there, and how he's always like with artsy films. It's like, you can love art films and popcorn entertainment films at the same time, and then score similar ones. You just got to remember, you can't score a film like Plan 9 from Outer Space on the same scale factor that you would rate, say, The Godfather. I mean, you can still give them the same score, but you got to specify that it's for different reasons. Like, for the entertainment factor, so bad it's good, it gets that. Specify that. Now here, like I said, it's just him being snarky. I mean, he can prefer Dante's Peak, all is right. That is his opinion, but reading that, it's like, yeah, this is part of the reason why. And it's like surprisingly cheesy disaster epic. Did he not see what type of film it was from the trailer and from the fact it's a volcano erupting in an area? That kind of tells you what type of film you're in for. It's one of those stupid things. It's like really, you did not comprehend it? I guess it shows even with someone who writes for a paper, sometimes they don't comprehend, but you can see that a lot. Like, I think I've mentioned it in comments and stuff below. Like with my Raymond reviews and other ones, I get a lot of people not having proper reading comprehension, and it's like, oh, this sucks. I was looking for the video, and this is just a person talking. Did you not see it says reviews in the title? That kind of implies it's going to be about people talking. Now, onto some interesting trivia that was from IMDb. There's only a couple things here. The ash that we see is mostly made of ground newspaper. Ingenious way to go about it. And at one point they mention, I'm probably going to butcher this, Parikuten. She's referring to a 1,500-foot volcano that emerged in a few months in Mexico back in 1942. In fact, I already knew about this story the first time I watched it, because when I was in middle school, not middle school, early elementary school, at one class we had these books that we would read, and then we had the audiobook with it. One of them was about volcanoes. This was when I was in my volcanoes and dinosaur phase. And one of them actually covered this story. That's how I first heard about it. When I found out it was an actual true story, I'm like, interesting. But that's the interesting thing about volcanism. Sometimes the volcano will just come out of nowhere. Now, the fault line there is probably different, where it's like separating. Or maybe it's just like a weird crack in the fault, and the lava started coming up and it made the volcano a hot spot. Think like Hawaii. But here, they use that as a note for no comparison, even though, like I said earlier, like probably not, because the fault lines are different, but it works to try to explain it. Overall, Volcano is a very entertaining film. Special effects have aged pretty well for the most part. The score, the direction, the cinematography are excellent. The type of screenplay it is adequate for this type of film. Like I said, with a film where there's a volcano in LA and the tagline is "The coast is toast," you know what type of film you're getting into. The actors do play it seriously, though. I mean, there's a little bit of that, not too much of that type of acting you would expect in a disaster film. They all take it seriously, but not too seriously to where it kind of makes you feel like you're taken out of the situation. But it is the type of acting you need for a disaster film like this. Definitely one of the more enjoyable disaster films from this time. I have not seen all of them, but it was one of the ones I was drawn to. But then again, I've always had more fascination with volcanoes than I have with, say, meteorites and tornadoes and all that. And maybe because this is more localized, maybe that's why I was drawn more to it. Maybe down the road I'll give Dante's Peak a watch so I can give my thoughts on that. Of course, there were competing ones. I mean, this was made by 20th Century Fox, and Dante's Peak was by Universal, so we'll just see how that is. As you can tell, that Volcano gets the Mars stamp of approval. If you watch it, you don't like it, it's not your cup of tea, and maybe you're like Ebert and you prefer Dante's Peak. Hey, different strokes for different folks. But for me, definitely a film I enjoy watching. I know they have it on DVD and Blu-ray. I don't know if there's any special features on it. I doubt it, other than probably the trailer. But I can definitely say from the covers I've seen that this cover is better. The other one is just Tommy Lee Jones running. Like, he'll be ready. He'll be there, so don't fear. Either way, if you can find this film, I'd say give it a watch. It's worth at least one watch. Till next time, guys.